Welcome to Ask SME Anything. Your chance to ask the ITProTV subject matter experts questions live. Here's your host, Ronnie Wong.
Hey, welcome to Ask Me Anything, a show in which you get to ask the subject matters here at ITProTV, the questions that you want answered as well. And today we have with us, of course, Mr. Wes Bryan as we get started. Now, for you to submit your questions, of course, you want to be able to tweet ITProTV and then hashtag Ask SME Anything, and that will give you that ability, of course, to be able to submit your question as we're on the show as well. And we'll put them in a list, and we'll try and get to as many of them as we can to help us out and to put everything in the proper perspective, especially when we have a subject matter expert like Wes Bryan. Now, Wes, thank you for being on the show. Glad you are with us today as we get started here. Now, Wes, you actually do hold a lot of different certifications, so I'm going to actually kind of count on you for many different things here. Now, in this realm of certifications, right, as we start to take a look, it covers so many different gamuts. But for you and I, we've kind of come up together through a lot of this as well. And so this means that we're probably going to get a few different questions on a very amount of topics here. So, Wes, are you ready to hear from our viewers?
I hope so, and hopefully I can live up to the name. That's for sure. It's going to be fun either way. So I'm looking forward to it.
All right, so let's go ahead and just jump in, and we will get started with the very first question that we have for this as well. And so what we have, of course, is a question that says, hey, does the adoption of the cloud change the role of the help desk? Now, Wes, this is actually probably on the mind of a lot of people that have been in the help desk role up in this point, and now they're starting to realize that the cloud technology, at least in the past few years, has become a bigger and bigger role. Well, do they still have a place in the industry, Wes? So how does this change it, or does it change anything for us?
Certainly. Well, it absolutely changes things, right? Because you know that me in the past, I've been more of like the break fix, hardware type person, get your hands in there. And yeah, I would say it definitely changes things. But, you know, for the viewers out there that might be worried, maybe I just got my A+ certification and now everything's going to the cloud. Does that invalidate my, my training? No, not at all. It doesn't, yes, it does change, but that doesn't mean elimination. You have to remember out there, all companies, they have users that are going to need support, right? You can't just avoid this fact. Well, at least not until the roles that those users perform become completely autonomous, right? And I don't think that's going to happen. It could, for sure. So I think one of the biggest things is that it's not going to be elimination, more as it will like a migration, right? Maybe a reduction in the in-house things that we do, but it'll just be more of a migration to more of a remote support model rather than that in-house support model that we see. That's one of the big things. If you think about it, people are still going to need passwords reset. And it doesn't matter if it's on-prem, it's within your core organization, or if it's hosted out there on somebody else's network in the cloud. People still are going to need passwords reset. People are going to still need help with, email, right? And I know you know this because you've probably set up quite a few of Exchange servers by now, and it doesn't matter if it's Exchange, whether it's, again, in our network, or if it's something like Office 365, So, yeah, I think we can definitely see that things will change, but not to worry about that. Maybe just your focus shifts a little bit.
Yeah, Wes, I agree. The traditional help desk role when I came up, it was really supporting two things, okay? The very fact that, one, you had to be a fairly good troubleshooter at the idea of the hardware, okay? And that meant that if something on the hardware, of course, broke, you were the one that kind of came in and had to replace it or had to fix it, whatever it might be. You had to be really good at doing something like that, as well as be able to help the end user to get the applications on their computer functioning the way that they need to. They can't get access to their email. They can't get access to the website they need, or a file server, whatever it might be. And all that is the traditional role of the help desk, of course, and what we have. But with the addition of the cloud, it seems like that the role does seem to expand a little bit in that sense, because we're now adding a component. But like what you're saying, the shift is probably even more key here. The shift is, of course, now not focusing on hardware too much, because hardware prices have kind of dropped, and the machines today compared to machines, Wes, think about the first like real computer. I'm not talking about the computer that your family bought, but like the first real computer that you bought in comparison in the hardware that you had to support versus now. they're much more stable now in terms of what we need, and we don't really even need as much power as we once thought that we did anymore for everything. Right?
Most definitely, because you and I have talked. I know, like one of our other hosts here, Don. You guys have been in computing for a long time. You remember when putting a computer was really science. All the dip switches and jumpers you had to focus on. The first computer I ever built, when I turned it on, it was actually stable. So that kind of tells you something. And it's not tooting my own horn. It's just the fact that, like Ronnie says, we have things like plug and play today. And if you think about it, operating systems are still operating systems. It doesn't matter if they're physical on a physical machine or they're virtualized and they're stored in the cloud. They really work the same way. So we'll still need things like imaging, provisioning, deployment, but not just those things too. Let's take it back to the help desk, right? We have desktop configuration that's post-installation, right? Somebody needs to know how to do something. We have stability. Ongoing usability that still has to happen,
Right.
and there'll be somebody that's onboarded into a company and they might not know the ins and outs of some kind of LOB or line of business application. Applications still
Right.
need supported too, right? And it could be the things like basic navigation. So again, I don't really think that there might be an absorption. I like one article I read. It says, I don't think that things are disappearing, but it might be an absorption of some of those things that we do that have been in the past, like you say, in-house, that aren't. Like I have a Dell account, and I've got many computers that we had to do Dell warranty calls. Well, that might go away because
Right.
the break fix part of that might be disappearing.
Yeah, and so that's where I see that what you were talking about, the idea of the migration or the transition, Wes, that you were talking about, is that what we don't want to do is tell you, oh no, you better get out of that field right now if you're in the help desk role. Well, you're not going to ever have to worry about that because that role is secure. Users are always going to need something like what Wes was stressing. But this time, the stress is really going to be more centered, focused around the user's need rather than on a computer fixed type of situation that's hardware-based anymore. And when we mean that, if we take the example of Office 365, which if you're not using it is kind of unusual because it is kind of the 800-pound gorilla in terms of productivity for most organizations today, that means that your role now becomes to help the person understand how to use Office 365, how to get connected, how to troubleshoot when, the file didn't appear on the OneDrive the way that they thought it would appear, or they're not getting access to the sites and services that they need. So I think you will see that shift in functionality, but the help desk personnel itself is not going to go away. And if you really think that's going to happen, it means you really do need to focus in on more concentrating on what the future is going to hold too, which of course is based in that cloud computing rather than so much of the hardware. Now, does that mean that hardware is going away? Not really. It just means the focus is going to be a lot different. People today will, of course, companies today will end up adding in computers which still end of life on a cycle of some sort. So more than likely, because the hardware is actually much more durable than it was at one point, even if they're still good, you're not going to wear it out until the point where it's actually in disrepair. You're just going to replace it in the end. So that's what most of that hardware-based help desk is going to be. But on the cloud side, you're going to continue to have to learn that environment is never going away, is where the future is. So don't lose hope for those of you that are just sitting there in the help desk role going, I don't know what I need to do next. You need to focus in on that technology then that's really valuable in your company. And all cloud technology right now, Wes, I know you've seen it, I've seen it. The very fact is learning about all this is really helping out your company because everybody in your company is not going to understand it. And if you can take the time to understand it and show them how it works, you're going to be a very valuable employee to that company.
Yeah, and it goes back to one of the things that I learned very early on, because like Ronnie said, we've kind of come up together with this, and is those communication skills that we learned early on. Those become more and more important because you're going to be in a remote management side. But again, like Ronnie says, don't stress about that. It's an exciting time to be in IT. It is not a time to say, oh, I wish, or am I okay? Absolutely, you're okay, right? As the migration of on-prem goes into the cloud, on-premises, in-house, we're still going to need support. Right? You're going to still need more support. And as the cloud grows, as they start to innovate new ways to take care of things while being on somebody else's network, that's going to create positions that we haven't even thought of yet, right? Every one of the cloud providers, whether it's Google Cloud, Azure, whether it's AWS, they all have huge ticketing systems as a service as well. Well, guess who fills out those tickets? The
Right.
first point of contact is typically the help desk. So I wouldn't worry about that, and I would be excited about it because you know what? It doesn't matter if it's in the cloud or if it's in your network. DHCP is still DHCP. DNS is still DNS. All these protocols that we talk about and stuff, they don't change. It's just the location that shifts. So I think communication skills and remote management is probably one of those things that you really, really want to focus on when it comes to, and still learn the basics.
There's no doubt that this area is just going to continue to grow, so don't be afraid of it is the challenge. For those of you that are actually manning help desk even now, you want to accept that challenge because that's where the future is going to be. So Wes, thank you again for helping us and to answer that question as well. And don't forget that right here at ITProTV, we do have, of course, different shows that we've also done in terms of cloud technology to get you ready. Wes was mentioning things like Office 365, but we also have some on AWS. We also have, of course, even the big one that Adam Gordon's working through, Azure content that will help you to get more situated in terms of the cloud environment. At the help desk level, you'll probably deal with more Office 365 than anything, I guarantee that. But for those of you going on towards administration of cloud technologies, you may want to check out those other shows as well right here on ITProTV.
Definitely.
All right, Wes, seems like that we are also ready and prepared for another question.
All right.
So somebody else has submitted one for us here. So our second question today comes from someone that says, do you recommend any type of troubleshooting model out there? Now, Wes, when we start to take a look at this idea in terms of troubleshooting and a particular model, is there any one that you favor?
Yes, the one that works.
The one that works, I think,
next
is a good
question.
one.
No, just kidding.
Okay.
Kidding. But
All right.
no, it's true. Somebody told me one time is just, I'll say 3 different pieces of advice on this, and we can talk just briefly about a troubleshooting model, right? The most important thing is to always have a systematic approach to applying, to tackling any issue that you're confronted with, right?
Right.
Don't get hung up initially on specifics that we can overthink it, right? Just always find the approach that works for you. All right. It's not, Adam, I've heard say, it's not a one size fits all, it's a one size fits one, right? What works for your company might not be the thing that works for our company, right? Be able to adapt and pivot on the fly, right? That's another thing, right? We haven't even got into the troubleshooting model. Just be adaptive, right? We're talking about cloud, right? Cloud's bringing new things that weren't here before, and that troubleshooting model that you followed just a year ago might be completely different than the one that you're going to follow in 6 months, right? So be able to adapt, right? Don't be so rigid in what you apply, right? Because the more rigid a model gets, the more limited it is in its scope of effectiveness, right? So don't put the horse blinders on. And I would say third thing on anything that you do is documentation. And I'm going to go ahead and raise my hand and say I'm not taking my own advice here because, having a plan written in a written form is crucial, right? We've talked about this, and I know you've talked about this in security episodes and stuff like that. When you talk about things like disaster recovery and business continuity, you don't want to wait until everything's going wrong to find out, hey, that's maybe the time we should start planning, right? A written plan is good because in situations when they get stressful, when they get heated, emotions can be in play, stress, anger, pessimism. You like to have that baseline, that thing that structured system that says, I don't care if it's four steps. I don't care if it's 7 steps. We use a 7-step a lot of times in the CompTIA realm. I know, Ronnie, I remember when you first started, I was actually, you're kind of like my mentor. You remember the Novell model?
Right.
There was a lot of different models, but one thing that was always consistent is that there is a structured, documented plan of action every time you implement something. And that's why the one that I've kind of got, again, just keep it on, this is kind of like the flex fit hat. It's not the fitted hat. This one can stretch and mold, right? I say 7 steps. If you include escalation or transference, if it's out of your realm, then there might be 8 steps. But one, I would say, so let's just take 7 basic steps, and we don't have to get complex in them. All right. Step 1, verification that an issue even exists, right? How many times has somebody called in, maybe never, and says, my computer's slow? Well, is the computer slow? Is the internet slow, right? So you got to verify that there actually is an issue because just because an end user tells you an issue doesn't necessarily mean there is one, right? So verification of an issue. Then identification of the issue. Identify what is it. And this is a big one too. And I know you've had to stress this before even with me coming up, things like, start at the physical layer of the OSI model, right? Is the root cause analysis. Don't treat the symptoms, treat what the actual cause is, right? And that's the big thing. You know, if you treat the symptoms, oh, the computer's slow, well, maybe I need to add more memory to it. No, the computer might be slow because the hard drive's full. You know, so make sure that you're not treating the symptoms. So identification of the issue, using things like vendor resources and documentations. Maybe and here's one. In-house documentation. Somebody once told me that that's a track record of your experience, it's a blueprint of your experience, and you can always refer back to it later. And how many times I wish I would have documented something like, just take something random like Dell warranty work where it was a motherboard and I had 5 steps that if I would have written these down would have saved me a lot of time in the future. So that's the other one. Step 2, identification of the issue, I would say. What are some other ones? The 3 I would think is a formulation of a potential solution. Now, notice I said a potential solution because you don't want to stop with just one thing. Develop multiple potential solutions, right? One of the formulations or developing a solution could be escalation or transference. I'll give you a classic example right now. All right, there's many times, and I know it, Ronnie is a Cisco instructor. I'm not a Cisco instructor. I'll teach you some Network Plus. I'll teach you some CompTIA. But when it comes to the configuration of an iOS interface and a Cisco router, I'm lost. So if it came down to patching the cable down, I could see the physical aspect of it, but I don't have the know-how to get in there and turn that port on in the switch. So what do? I'd come to somebody like, let's say, Ronnie, that I knew exactly what to do, and you escalate it. Don't ever be afraid to say, I don't know. I think it's when you're afraid to say, I don't know, you're setting yourself up for failure, right? Because if you say you know, you're going to be held accountable for what you know. So I would say that that's where it could be 8 steps, and these don't have to be in strict order. Then the 4th step is the actual remediation. Right now, remediation, we try to figure out, do we do this during business hours, out of business hours, because we don't want to eliminate productivity, because then we're not really doing our jobs when it comes to the solution implementation. So that's step 4. And to kind of recap real quick, verification, identification, formulating solutions, remediation. Then the 5th step is really, really important, right? I would say the 4th step is due care, right? How do we actually implement the solution? And I would say the 5th one is the verification that the remediation worked, right? So what I mean by that, all right, you ran a virus scan, you found out that it was a virus. Did you eliminate the virus, right? Just because you quarantine it, you got to make sure that you follow up. And that's the big thing, is just ongoing monitoring to ensure that the problem has been solved. You don't close a ticket well, it won't look good on you, I guess, if you close a ticket and it comes back and you didn't solve the problem. And I have also done that from experience. I've done that where I said, yeah, it was fixed, and no, unfortunately, it wasn't fixed. So verification. 6 is they're all so important. I can't put any heavier weight. Communication. I would say the 6th step is communication and or prevention, maybe a combination of both, right? If this happened, did it happen because the user's mishap, or was it something the user was doing, or was it something that the IT staff was doing, like maybe not checking things like ongoing maintenance? Oh, well, we knew that they were having an overheating issue, or every 6 months we're supposed to maybe, I don't know, blow the dust out of a case, right? So communication and prevention. Communicate with the end user. This is why it happened. This is what happened. This is what we fixed. And you might want to try these things that can help to kind of be more proactive and not reactive. And then the last one is the one that I never take any of my own advice or eat, I'm not taking any of my own medicine, and that's documentation. Yeah. It is so, and Ronnie laughs because he knows it's true, and I'm so horrible about this. Documentation is key, all right? Because your documentation really, even if you don't keep it for your company, typically you are going to have some kind of ticketing system, and sure, if you're doing warranty work, you're going to have full documentation, and that might be required. But even if it isn't required, remember your documentation is a blueprint of your work history. It's a blueprint of your experience, and you can always refer back to it. And chances are, if a end user calls in with a situation, it's probably a good chance that somebody has had that problem before. And man, it would have saved me a lot of steps if I could just refer to that documentation and say, I've seen this. I know how to do it. This is how I'm going to fix it. Turned a 2-hour job of research into, I don't know, let's say 10-minute job. So that's it. Verification, identification, formulate your solutions, remediate, verify that you've done your job, and then document.
Yeah, Wes, that's a very good model to actually be able to follow when you can actually follow it and do all those steps. The problem that we have a lot of times right inside of a production network is time.
Yes, sir.
So trying to remember all those steps is, I'm not saying it's impossible, but at the same time, you might not be able to give each one the justice that they deserve,
Absolutely.
or consideration that they all can they all serve. Now, how do we deal with that? Is kind of the key is when that happens. Is hopefully if you began to kind of realize how many devices you were doing, documentation became second nature to you, and what you came up with is essentially a checklist, and that's kind of a key when I think about the idea of troubleshooting model. Any business that you go into that already has an established IT department of some sort, you're probably going to see that they're saying, here's the way we want you to troubleshoot this, and here's what the steps are. And they'll give you a checklist so that it's like you go through and it's hardware, you're just checking off that you check these things. And it's not that they're trying to keep track of stuff that you've done, but at the same time, they're trying to provide a consistent and standardized pattern of troubleshooting so that if you do have to come to the point like what Wes was talking about in escalation, well, I didn't do it any differently than what Wes would have done. So if we are escalating this up to somebody else, they go, all right, we know that this pattern was followed, and there's a reason why we got the ticket. And it's not just because Wes goes, I just didn't want to do it. I just handed that up, and Ronnie's there trying to figure it out, and he's spending all this time on something that should have only taken him 20, 30 minutes to do. But here it is, 2 hours, 3 days later sometimes. He's still trying to figure this thing out. So the idea of following that pattern and having that consistency through it, it helps when you have something like the checklist that ensures that you don't go through that and without actually hitting all the steps. And hitting all the steps, even though a lot of us go, oh, I just internalize that, I don't think about it. The idea of actually keeping it external is key, because when we think that we've memorized it all, and you might have, but if you're like me, you don't remember half the things that you think about, and all of a sudden you realize you skipped 2 or 3 steps in there.
Sure. Now
Now you've missed something, just because you chose to kind of skip the step that you got. Oh, of course that's working. Of course that's not doing it. And the other day, Wes, I was in the middle of doing a demonstration on a lab that I was doing, and it failed. And when it came back for me troubleshooting, it was simple. I had actually just inverted a 0-1 for a 1-0. That's all that I did, and yet that caused the entire lab to fail that I was actually trying to do. So just doing simple things like that are really helpful, but it is going to depend on the industry that you're in, and of course even the technical field that you're in, on what model that you'll do. So I recommend that you try and pick up a generic model like what Wes is talking about, because that will help you out in everything, okay, as you actually troubleshoot, even from your kitchen sink, and what's clogged, why is the pressure low, whatever it might be. You start using that model that he's talking about, it really does help you all the way through to networking that you're doing. So it's a great thing to have in mind, and the more experience you'll get, the more you'll kind of streamline it the way that you want to, which is cool.
The best word I think you said in that whole thing was just consistency.
Yep.
That consistency. And you really can boil this down even more, right? This is very generic, but any troubleshooting method should lead to the recognition of a problem, diagnosis, and remediation. Any other steps in there are just how you tailor make it to whatever your needs are.
Yeah, and it really is. It's going to be so different, and especially for those of you working on hardware, and if it's a configuration issue or it's a real hardware issue. That's one of the hardest distinctions to make, at least in my experience, Wes, was this something that actually dealt with the hardware? In other words, was a hardware an issue? Was it broken? Was there something? Or was it just a simple misconfiguration on my part as I did that? And of course, the more stuff that I've ever troubleshooted, it's always been me, not the hardware so much. But hopefully you won't find that to be true. But just making that distinction of where the problem resides is going to be key. And then, of course, those types of remediation. Now, I'll take the Cisco example kind of because they streamline this so much so, and that's because Cisco really likes this idea of timing, and they understand the idea of being in a production network. And when I talk about streamlining, they streamline like crazy, right? Once you identify that issue, they just kind of give you some simple questions to ask, such as, what do you know has to work? So in other words, do you have the proper configuration on a Cisco router for it to function the way that it needs to? Don't worry about all the hard stuff. Just verify that the basics are working first, and is the configuration correct? And from there, anything that deviates from that, you know that that's where you're going to begin troubleshooting. So those are just some of the things that you'll pick up, but that all comes from experience. But starting off with the base model like what Wes said, it really is the key, because once you get that in hand, then you don't mind learning another model. You don't mind picking up something else that will help you to remain consistent. But in today's world, you are going to end up seeing that more than likely you'll be following a checklist is what you'll be following to ensure you don't skip over steps, because that's what everybody loves to do. They love to skip over steps. They love to make these assumptions that really are not going to be beneficial to your entire team. So instead, you'll probably be following that. And don't take offense at that, okay?
Sure.
Make sure that you follow it because it's part of the procedure, but at the same time, it will help you to become a more careful troubleshooter in your future as well. So it is a key component to becoming a better IT professional each and every day. Now, Wes, you did mention some of the other models here, and the one that you mentioned, you said was kind of based off of the CompTIA model.
Absolutely.
So,
it's about seven steps, 8 steps, depending on escalation.
Yeah. So in that, if you want to learn a little bit more about it, you, of course, can check out our ITProTV course library, and in there you'll find probably in the CompTIA Network Plus and the A Plus show, you'll see where Wes kind of does that in more detail, and you'll, of course, be able to actually learn that right there, too. All right, Wes, thank you again for helping us. And don't forget, for those of you that are watching this live and you're saying, hey, I want to submit a question, make sure you tweet right here at ITProTV and hashtag it with Ask Me Anything. And that will also give us, the chance to be able to have your question queued up and ready to go as we continue to move on through. Now, speaking of that, I just got the signal here that says that our next question is also ready. So, Wes, here it is, our next question. This is actually kind of a neat one, especially in the light of today's world. Should I build a computer today or just buy a computer? Now, Wes, at one time, I would have absolutely just said, build it on your own, okay? But the older that I get, this is true, I go with buy, okay? So, Wes, this is a fairly big question. So what are we taking a look at here?
Again, there's no clear answer. We got to factor in a lot of things there. I hate the yes and no answers, so I'm going to say yes and no. I'll do what I don't like. I'll become that which I don't like. Well, I would say that if you are a student and you love technology and you're getting into technology, Ronnie, you told me many years ago, make it a hobby, right? This is how you excel at this, is to make it a hobby. If you just can't wait to do more because you really like it, you're going to be doing well. And if that's you, build a computer at least once. Doesn't mean that you have to keep building every computer you have from then on out. Build it just once, and you see what goes into it. And that also helps you to become a better technician as well as troubleshooting. But again, it really boils down to what is it that you need to do, right? If you need to send an email fast, well, you might get away with buying one. I personally today, I would do the same thing that Ronnie says. I agree with that statement. I would buy one. Why? Well, because you can ultimately a lot of times save yourself a lot of money, right? And let's tell you what I mean. I tell you what Ronnie doesn't know is I grabbed his credit card prior to the show, and we're going to go shopping. So maybe we can look maybe on Newegg or something, and we'll kind of talk about it, right? So on Newegg, you can go here and Tiger Direct, Best Buy, doesn't matter, right? We just go into Newegg because we could also, if you wanted to kind of price together individual pieces. But let's go ahead and go up to the upper right, left-hand corner. We're going to go to Computer Systems and look at desktop computers. And you're going to see something here. We're going to go ahead and we're going to, it doesn't matter around the operating system, perfectly fine with that. But let's go ahead and start filtering by price down on the left-hand side. We'll scroll down a little bit. There should be some price ranges. And we're going to start, let's say, about $100 to $200. All right. Now, we're not going to go through every one of these, but I want to make the point here is that when you start filtering between $100 and $200, and looks like there are some non-desktop models in there. Looks like the filter didn't. It does say desktop computers there.
Sure enough, it is desktop.
But yeah,
filter my Windows 10 here. And
okay, there you go. Yeah, maybe that'll help
us out.
All right, there we go. Little more there. But what you'll notice is in around the $100 to $200 range, you're going to start to notice this term, refurbished. Refurbished, right? Most of them are going to be refurbs at that price. You can see, there we go. And HP and Dells, plenty of Dells. And I will tell you at that range, I'm not like picking favorites here, a lot of Optiplexes. Why is that? Well, a lot of Optiplexes came out of businesses that were using them for business needs and no longer need them, so they take them back and they refurbish them. So that's $100 to $200 range. Now, rather than go through all the categories, right? If you look at the $200 to $300 range, right? I went ahead and, did this kind of beforehand, and you're going to notice that there are still tons of refurbished computers, right? But one of the things that you're going to also notice is that the hardware that's in them is third generation. Like, for instance, third generation Intel computers, right? With third generation, we're currently on eighth generation computers, 8th gen, right? So there's another refurbished, right? Now, where does this get us back to the question, should I buy or should I build? Well, if you just need to send an email, and that's all you really need to do, you're not gaming, you're not doing any intense, any kind of even moderate graphics work, that might be for you. You can get a refurbished model. Now, to kind of skip forward here, what I want you to know is that when you look at the $300 and $400 range, again, most refurbs, you start getting into the $400 and $500 range, you get a page, I think, half a page of OEMs. I mean, original equipment manufacturers, right? There we see some Acers and stuff. You start to see a little bit less of the refurbs, right? And now we had to get to $400 and $500. But this is still a very low-end computer. You're not going to be doing any gaming on it. It's not going to have the high-end graphics card, right? All the way up to the $600 and $700 range. The $600 and $700 range, we still have a lot of OEMs, right? The OEMs, again, just original equipment manufacturers. Doesn't say refurbished on it. I guess they're all like original equipment manufacturers. But you start to see more computers that are brand new computers, right? And you can see the star ratings again, but you start to see less and less refurbished. But you have to get into the $600 and $700 range before that happens. Now, prior to doing this, I want to kind of just spec out just a modern or a moderate build. I could have gone cheaper. We could have gone a lot cheaper than this, but I came up with about just under $800. $200 graphic card, 8th generation CPU. It was an Intel i5, got an MSI board at around $200, case $70, power supply $60, hard drive another $60, and you can add, my math is bad, so you can say I think it's right around $800. So the question is, for $800, you're still building it. You're still not getting a high-end computer, and you're spending $700 or $800, right? I wouldn't even really say getting a mid-grade computer. You're getting a computer that will probably do the most of an average home user needs. But when you start getting into gaming, you start to getting any production, now we're talking about $1,000, right? And if you're talking about building it, I've seen them go to $2,000. And it's a lot of work, right?
Yeah, it's a lot of work at the very beginning because you're having to pick out the parts that you want. But there is a benefit to building your own computer if you also choose to do so. But it does depend on your wallet in today's world and what you actually need to be able to do. So normally when I think about the idea of a build, it's probably, at least for my end, something I want to custom make. In other words, there's a reason I want to do it. There may be a game that I want to be able to play, but everything that I look at, I think if I make it comparable, or even if it's just a couple $100 more, but I want to hand build that, then I might choose to do that. But it's something custom. Now, if I need to do something else, so for example, Wes, let's say that I want to actually build a free NAS machine on my own. Well, that means I need a lot more connections for hard drives. I need a lot more space for something like that. Well, then I could go out and buy a device that might cost me, a pretty good penny to make sure that it works. I could actually just build it on my own as well. So I normally think about at this point where what I'm doing is if I'm going to do a custom build for my home, it's because I need a custom machine to do so. If I'm just going to have this be kind of the family computer that just needs an okay or a decent thing and it's not really designed around any specific need, then I think buying one would be what I would actually consider.
Definitely.
Now, what about when it comes to the workplace, Wes? What do you think about a custom build there? What do you think there?
Well, I think it gets too disjointed, inconsistent across that. Now, I'm certainly not saying, because we've seen that in some companies that we worked where we had one specific graphics designer and they needed that, but 100 other employees didn't need that. So that might be a reason that you jump in with a custom. But if you've got 10, 15, 20 design people, you might actually be doing better going to somebody again, I'm not picking favorites, Dell, HP, or the big boys there, and saying, hey, let's get a bulk deployment of these machines, and not necessarily that we save money, but we get that consistency, because then you start getting this hodgepodge of systems, and Ronnie, you built yours, and I built mine completely different, and maybe your thought, it becomes more I guess subjective as to what the endpoint is. Like your computer that you build, you have a specific functionality that you build it for, and we know this end users, and if you don't, you're just getting into IT, you will learn that every end user has a different set of specific needs, even if they work in the same department.
True.
So then it becomes a nightmare. It's not so much that the initial expense might be too crazy. It's the ongoing maintenance expense that becomes very, very difficult, because somebody likes the NVIDIA card. No, I don't like NVIDIA. I can't stand it. I want ATI. So now we got this hodgepodge of systems, and our support, hardware support list becomes something that is very, very hard to maintain. So I would say if you're a company that has one specific, like maybe even a couple of people that can have consistent custom builds, I don't know if that's even a term, right? Consistent and custom, that it's not that bad. But as the company, as that team gets a little bit bigger, everybody has their own ideas, subjective ideas of what they want a computer to do. And I think it can become like basically like trying to support a bunch of Frankensteins holding hands together.
Yeah, Wes, I agree with that type of assessment. One of the things I don't recommend for at least a company or a productive, an enterprise of some sort here, is this ability to just buy like individual pieces and components and have somebody stack them all together. Now, it doesn't mean that I have any distrust in them, but what I'm looking for, especially if I'm supporting 100 users or 200 users or 50 users, whatever it might be, is one word: warranty. Warranty is the word I'm looking for. I know that sounds strange. Even if it's not the complete matchup to everything that I want, it's close. But the idea of the warranty at this point, Wes, there were several years ago, probably a decade ago now, from what I remember, Wes, we actually bought these for our company, the Optiplex 745s.
Yes.
And there were the hard drives that were in them that I don't care. We bought 50 of them, and I swear to you, 48 out of 50 of those hard drives died.
That was the 10,000 RPM Velociraptor drives.
10,000 which at that point they were relatively new on the market, and they were the fastest things that we had out there. But at the same time, we didn't realize that they wouldn't last any longer than a year. And that becomes problematic, right? When you're actually having to send back on a rate after the first 8 months or so. We were probably sending back 2 or 3 a month, if not even faster rate than that, that used to happen. But the great thing is, since we had them with the 3-year warranty, it didn't really matter. We could send them back and get replacements for them. If I had custom built that myself without a warranty, that drive goes out. 50 of those drives or 30 of those drives go out. That's a lot of replacement dollars that I'd have to consider. So that's why I like this idea when it comes to an enterprise. The ability to have it under warranty or some type of coverage work is a key factor that makes it easy for me to breathe when hardware, goes down. And so, like I said, I don't want to put off the impression that all custom hardware, all computers that you choose to build on your own, they're bad. I think they're phenomenal. I love seeing people with the creativity that they have. But once you get in this environment of support, now if Wes is our support technician, he's got to figure out Ronnie's custom build versus your custom build. And if both of those are so diverse, Wes may actually go, I'm comfortable with all the Optiplex 745s, but I've never heard of this Ronnie 833, whatever it might be. And now he's got to figure out what that is just on the hardware side. So these are some of the things that I would say that you would consider if you're trying to consider this for either your home build or if you're considering this for an organization. So there are times where you go, refurbished is enough, which is fine. But I would always say, get the refurbished if you feel like that's what's going to save you dollars, but get the best warranty that you can afford. I'm not saying get the best warranty that they have out there, but get the best one that your company can afford, and make sure that you keep a close monitor of those devices too. With most refurbs, most of the components in them, especially the ones that are worn out, they've replaced. It doesn't mean that they replaced everything. So you've got to keep that in mind. If your support team is small, you've definitely got to keep that in mind. Even if your support team is big, They're not going to know about every single piece of hardware that's out there. So make sure you do think about something like that for an enterprise too. Okay. So Wes, in the very end of it, okay, for you, would you choose to custom build a computer today if you said, here's the multimedia system that I've always wanted to build?
Yes, I think I still would. And I'm going to kind of just parrot what Ronnie says. If you've got a specific functionality that well, two reasons to custom build today. One, if you've never done it, you need to. It's fun. Ronnie's right. It's fun. Second, if you've got a specific functionality that you can't do like the cookie cutter, hey, let's add all these options and let them go ahead and build it for you and it'll be under warranty and you don't have to worry about that, well, then customize. However, I believe today, I don't know that I would build another computer because I just think, especially with the price of video cards, any of you guys that are watching this right now, what are we, June 6th, video cards out there are still sometimes $300 over the MSRP. To me, it's just not worth it anymore. Unless you're a gamer and you need that power, by all means, go ahead, throw your money at the wall if you want to. But I'd throw my money into something like you said that's warranted, and they've already done all the hard work for me, the heavy lifting.
It really is a nice kind of an ah factor when you go, all right, we've got our 50 computers, they're up and running today, and what happens if hardware breaks? Well, great thing is we don't have to pay for it. We'll just send it back and it's under warranty and we'll be ready to go. So it is kind of a comfort thing that you have to kind of deal with. So everything in computing is not always about getting the best. Sometimes it's about trying to say, what can we support is what we can do. So that's what we want. Now, here at ITProTV, we do actually have a custom computer that we use as subject matter experts. We call it our Thunder Lizard, I think is what we call it. And that's because Nate built this insane machine that is wicked fast, and it does work for our shows, and so we're very happy with that. But everything else that we have, of course, is still under warranty. But we built that one because we knew that multiple people would be using it for things like VMs, and those are the creation. And so we want to make sure it was a super powerful machine.
Absolutely. We just have to ask Nate on how many times he's had to drain the reservoir and refill the liquid cooling system. So again, you see support becomes problematic with custom builds, and maybe not in a small enterprise or a small office, but definitely in a large enterprise, especially when you're doing things like driver support or supporting a specific functionality in a line of business application, and you've got one computer, a handful of computers that it doesn't work right, but 78 computers, I'm just making these numbers up, 100 computers in the background work all fine, and that's where you get those, hodgepodge of systems.
All right, Wes, we are up to our very final question of our time together. And so when we take a look at it here, it was submitted, I am studying for my first A+ test, and I am nervous. Any tips for studying here? Oh,
wow. That brings back some memories on that one. I can tell you, first of all, every test that I've taken a bunch of them, I'm still nervous. I mean, nervousness is going to happen. Accept it, but don't let it overcome you, right? So some of the things that I would think of as in your studying, right? Everybody learns differently. Some people are tactile. They have to have hands-on. It's one of the greatest ways, I think, to learn. But some people are audio. Some people are visual learners, right? When it comes to studying, how you actually study, whether it's tactile, getting your hands on there, you just repetition, making notes and stuff, do what works for you and stick with it. Try multiple approaches, right? I guess when studying for any test, don't shortcut. Don't try to create shortcuts. I've got to study next week because I've got an exam. It wasn't the right time to schedule the exam if it's next week and you're still trying to figure out how you should study for it. So what I would say, find a plan that works for you, right? If it's hands-on reading coupled with some audio, coupled with something like ITProTV, coupled with something, some other, books, right? Utilize them. There's a lot of different approaches, and there's never a one-size-fits-all, because I'm sure, Ronnie, the way you learn might not be, and most likely is not the way that I'm going to learn, right? There's some commonality to it, but we all learn a little bit different. When it comes to the nervousness side of it, I would say the biggest thing is just good test-taking skills. I know you've definitely given advice to hundreds of students over the years in your career that you have to have good test-taking skills, right? Understanding what a question, read the question, answer the question, don't create a question. That's the big thing, is just, you're going to be nervous. That's perfectly fine, but try to, and I can't say slow down because on an A+ test, you might have plenty of time, but Ronnie, you've been in the Cisco world. There's no time to slow down. So you just kind of got to learn to just don't let it overcome you. Right, you get in there. Make sure you get plenty of rest the night before. Make sure that you're reading the questions, you're understanding keywords, you're understanding. Here's another thing too with the practice test. You take practice tests. That's where a lot of people like to, maybe round off their training. Notice I said round off your training. Practice tests are not a substitution for your own study time, and that just has to be stressed. They're very limited question bank that they're going to ask you, and if you answer a question based on a memorization of the question and answer, then that doesn't really prove that you understand the concept. Make sure that you understand the concept of what that question's asking you, and I know you've said it before, understand the wrong answers, right? Because maybe you got an answer wrong on a practice test. Well, understand why your answer was wrong and understand what that answer actually applies to, and it can broaden your knowledge. So I would say, note-taking, audio, just make it a hobby. That's the big thing. There's a lot of different study methods, and then just good test-taking skills can really help you for those times where maybe you didn't study something the way you need, and that one question that they asked is the one thing that you overlooked. You might see that you actually do really good if you just apply some basic, test-taking skills to it.
Yeah, Wes, that's a great list of different things that we can do. The only other thing that I would just add in there, okay, especially if you're doing something like the CompTIA Plus, if you are, go to CompTIA's website and make sure you download a copy of the exam objectives first.
It's your checklist.
It's your checklist to make sure that you know the material that's in there. So, in other words, as you look through those objectives and those the list of objectives there, take a check mark and check all the ones you go, okay, I'd feel comfortable in answering something like this. And then the ones that you don't circle, go back and start studying those areas too. Doesn't mean you ignore the rest, but you make those review and you spend time on the areas that you don't really feel as comfortable in until you feel like I could answer a question on this, and then you're also ready to go as well. And all the other things also help you in preparing for timing, formatting, you name it, all those are also clear too. And of course, one of the best things you can do, and I mean, who's biased here, but what you can do, of course, is as you're preparing for the CompTIA Plus, watch the CompTIA Plus show right here on ITProTV, and that will help you out the most as well, because we do cover all the exam objectives comprehensively, so make sure you also want to do that too. All right, Wes. Well, we are up on our hard time limit here. So thank you, Wes, for joining us today as we've answered some of these different questions for all of the viewers out there. And thank you also for watching. Remember that you can continue to submit questions to ITProTV and hashtag it with Ask SME Anything, and that will get put into our queue. And we'll answer the questions right here as we do so, on the basis that we're doing it. And also, if you're a member, you can submit those questions through our Q&A forums too, and we'll tend to answer those questions as well. So don't just think your question probably won't be answered. More than likely, your question will be answered at some point in time. So you want to make sure you check that out. But this is our time limit for today. So thank you for joining Ask Me Anything, and make sure you check us out again when we actually go live once again. So thank you for your time, and we'll see you next time. Signing off for Wes Bryan and myself. Take care, everybody.